The convent sat at the edge of a small town, quiet and almost hidden behind tall trees that had grown there longer than anyone could remember. People who passed by often said the place felt frozen in time. The stone walls were old, the windows narrow, and the iron gate rarely stayed open for long. Inside those walls lived women who had chosen a life of silence, prayer, and service. Among them was Sister Margaret, one of the oldest nuns still living in the convent. Sister Margaret woke each morning before the bell rang. Her body no longer needed the sound to remind her. Age had taught her its own schedule. Her knees ached when she stood, and her hands were thin and marked with years of work. But she never complained. She moved slowly, carefully, as if she did not want to disturb the quiet air around her. To the younger sisters, she was almost part of the building itself, always there, always gentle, always silent. She had lived in the convent for more than 50 years. Most of her life had been spent in simple routines: cleaning, cooking, tending the small garden, and caring for anyone who came seeking help. She had nursed sisters through illness, written letters for those who could no longer see clearly, and sat beside dying townspeople who had no one else to hold their hand. She never asked for thanks. She believed service was not something to be noticed. The chapel was the heart of the convent. Every day, Sister Margaret walked there with the others, her steps slower than most, but steady. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting soft colors on the stone floor. The smell of old wood and candle wax filled the room. At the front stood the altar, simple and worn smooth by time. To most people, the chapel looked complete. But to Sister Margaret, something important was missing. At the side of the chapel was a closed wooden door. Behind it sat an old piano. It had not been played in many years. Some of the younger sisters barely knew it existed. The door stayed locked, and the key was kept in the office of the convent leaders. The rule was clear: no music during services, no piano at gatherings, no exceptions. Music, they believed, pulled the heart away from quiet devotion. Sister Margaret never spoke about the piano. She never asked for the door to be opened. But sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her eyes rested on that door a moment longer than usual. Her face would soften, as if she were looking at an old friend. Before she became a nun, long before the gray hair and slow steps, music had been a large part of her life. As a young woman, she had learned to play the piano in a small house where evenings were filled with simple songs. She was not famous, and she never dreamed of being. She played for family, for neighbors, and later for people in hospitals and shelters. Music had been her way of comforting others when words failed. When she chose the convent, she believed she was leaving many things behind. She gave up possessions, plans, and the idea of a life that belonged only to her. She also believed she was giving up music. At first, that sacrifice felt heavy, but over time, she told herself that silence was another kind of song. She learned to listen instead of play. Years passed, then decades. The piano became a memory she kept folded away in her heart. When the convent leaders decided to remove music completely, she did not protest. Obedience was something she had practiced all her life. If rules were made, she followed them. She believed that faith meant trust, even when understanding was hard. The younger sisters often came to her for advice, though she rarely spoke much. When she did, her words were simple and calm. She never told stories about herself. Most of them knew nothing about her past. To them, she was just Sister Margaret, the kind elderly nun who always seemed to know when someone needed comfort. Every afternoon, she spent time in the garden. Her hands, though weak, knew the soil well. She talked to the plants softly, as if they were living companions. Sometimes, while pulling weeds or watering flowers, her fingers moved slightly in the air, pressing invisible keys. She did not realize she was doing it. The motion was as natural as breathing. At night, when the convent grew quiet and the halls echoed only with distant footsteps, she lay awake longer than she liked. Sleep did not come easily anymore. In those moments, memories returned without asking. She remembered the weight of piano keys beneath her fingers, the way sound filled a room and changed how people felt. She remembered faces relaxing, tears falling, pain easing, if only for a few minutes. She never told herself she missed it. She told herself she was grateful for the life she had, and she was. Still, there was a small ache she carried quietly, one she believed was part of growing old. One evening, during prayers, a sister's voice trembled as she read aloud. Someone in the community had passed away, a person known to many of them. The chapel felt heavier than usual. Sister Margaret listened, her hands folded tightly. In her chest, something stirred. She imagined how music could have helped in that moment, how a gentle melody might have allowed grief to breathe. The thought surprised her. She quickly pushed it away. After prayers, as the sisters slowly left the chapel, Sister Margaret remained seated. Her eyes drifted once more to the closed door by the wall. The silence around her felt louder than before. She stood carefully and walked past the door, brushing her fingers lightly against the wood as she passed. It was a small, almost unnoticed gesture, but to her, it meant everything. She returned to her room that night feeling restless. She knelt by her bed and prayed, not for permission, not for change, but for peace. She asked for strength to continue being obedient, and for her heart to remain humble. Still, as she lay down, the memory of music stayed with her, warm and alive. Sister Margaret did not know that this quiet longing, hidden for so many years, was slowly moving towards something she could not yet imagine. She believed her life would continue as it always had, simple, silent, and unseen. She did not know that the very thing she had given up long ago was waiting, patient and forgotten, just a few steps away behind a locked door. The next few days passed quietly, just like most days in the convent. The routine never changed much, and Sister Margaret followed it as she always had. Morning prayers, simple breakfast, small duties, then quiet hours of work. To anyone watching, nothing seemed different, but inside her, something had begun to shift, though she could not yet explain it. One afternoon, a new helper arrived at the convent. The leaders had arranged for a young woman from the nearby town to assist with cleaning and organizing old storage rooms. She was polite, soft-spoken, and clearly nervous about being in such a quiet place. Sister Margaret noticed her right away, not because she was loud, but because she moved with the same careful respect the older nuns once had when they were new. The helper was asked to work near the chapel, sorting through old boxes that had not been opened in years. Dust filled the air, and the smell of age clung to everything. Sister Margaret was assigned to guide her, mostly because she knew the building better than anyone else. As they walked through the long hallway, the helper asked gentle questions about the convent and its history. Sister Margaret answered simply. She spoke about the walls, the garden, the chapel, and the people who had come and gone over the years. She did not speak about herself. Still, as they passed the closed door near the chapel, the helper paused. "What's in there?" she asked quietly. Sister Margaret stopped for a moment. "An old piano," she said. The helper's eyes widened with surprise. "A piano? I didn't know there was music here." "There isn't anymore," Sister Margaret replied. Her voice was calm, but something in her chest tightened. Later that day, while sorting through one of the storage rooms, the helper found a small stack of old papers tied together with faded string. Curious, she brought them to Sister Margaret. They were sheet music, yellowed and fragile, with handwritten notes in the margins. Sister Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she held them. She recognized her own handwriting immediately. She had not seen those pages in decades. For a long moment, she could not speak. "You wrote these?" the helper asked softly. Sister Margaret nodded. "A long time ago," the helper smiled. "They're beautiful, even just looking at them." Sister Margaret carefully tied the papers back together. "They belong to the past," she said, more to herself than to the helper that evening. The memory of those pages stayed with her. She remembered the places she had played, the people who had listened without saying a word, and the way music had allowed feelings to come out safely. She wondered when she had decided that those memories were no longer allowed to live. The next day, news spread that the convent would soon host a small gathering. It was an important date, marking many years since the convent had first opened. Former members of the community and a few townspeople would be invited to attend a short service and meal. The leaders wanted everything to be perfect, calm, and respectful. As plans were discussed, someone mentioned how quiet the event might feel. There would be prayers, readings, and simple words spoken. No one suggested music. No one ever did. Sister Margaret listened from the corner of the room. Her heart beat a little faster than usual. Without fully planning to, she raised her hand slightly. The room grew still. Everyone turned toward her, surprised that she wished to speak. "I wonder," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "if music might bring comfort that day." The silence that followed felt heavy. One of the leaders cleared her throat. "We agreed long ago that music was not needed here," she replied gently but firmly. "It can distract from reflection." Sister Margaret lowered her hand. "Of course," she said. "I only thought to ask." The discussion moved on, but her words lingered in the room like an echo. Some of the younger sisters glanced at her with curiosity. as if they were seeing her for the first time. That night, Sister Margaret sat alone in the chapel after everyone had left. The candles had been extinguished, and the room was dark except for a small light near the altar. She sat in the same place she had sat for years, listening to the silence she knew so well. She thought about obedience and how it had shaped her life. She had always believed that obedience meant letting go of personal desires, but now she wondered if there was a difference between desire and purpose. She wondered if the gift she had been given was meant to disappear simply because time had passed. Her hands rested on her lap, and slowly, without sound, her fingers moved again, pressing invisible keys. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness alone, but from the weight of all the years she had carried this part of herself quietly. In the days that followed, the helper continued her work. She often sat with Sister Margaret during breaks, listening more than speaking. One afternoon, she asked, "Do you ever wish you could play again?" Sister Margaret was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I wish I could help people the way I once did. That sounds like playing again." The helper said gently. Sister Margaret smiled, but did not answer. As the gathering drew closer, emotions in the convent grew stronger. Memories were shared. Old stories were told. Some sisters grew anxious, others reflective. Sister Margaret noticed how often people seemed weighed down by thoughts they could not express. One evening, as she passed the closed piano door once more, she stopped. This time, she placed her palm flat against the wood. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, asking for guidance rather than permission. She did not yet know what she would do. She only knew that something inside her had awakened, and it refused to be ignored any longer. For the first time in many years, Sister Margaret allowed herself to believe that her past might still have a place in the present, and with that belief came both hope and fear, walking side by side in her heart. As the day of the gathering grew closer, the convent felt different. The walls were the same, the halls just as quiet, but something unseen moved through the place. The sisters spoke more softly than usual, as if afraid to disturb their own thoughts. Old memories seemed to sit beside them at meals and follow them into prayer. Sister Margaret noticed it in small ways. One sister paused longer before speaking. Another wiped away tears quickly and said nothing. The weight of the years pressed gently but firmly on everyone's hearts. Sister Margaret understood that feeling well. She had lived with it for a long time. She kept herself busy. She folded linens, cleaned shelves, and helped in the kitchen. Her body tired easily now, and by afternoon her legs often trembled. Still, she did not slow down. Movement kept her thoughts from becoming too loud. One morning, she was asked to help clean the office where the convent records were kept. The room smelled of old paper and ink. Cabinets lined the walls, filled with files from long ago. As she wiped dust from a low shelf, she noticed a small wooden box pushed into the corner. Something about it felt familiar. She knelt with effort and opened it. Inside were old programs from past gatherings, handwritten notes, and at the bottom, a small, worn key. Her breath caught. She knew that key. She sat back on her heels, holding it carefully in her palm. It was the key to the piano room. She had not seen it in years. Slowly, she closed the box and placed the key back inside, just as she had found it. Her heart was beating faster than it should have. All day, the memory of that key stayed with her. She told herself it meant nothing. Keys could be misplaced. Old boxes were often forgotten. But deep down, she knew this was not a simple accident. That evening, she went to speak with one of the convent leaders. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she folded them together. "I wanted to ask again," she said softly. "Just once. For the gathering." The leader looked at her with concern, not anger. "You know why we made that decision," she replied. "Music brings attention. It stirs feelings that are hard to control." Sister Margaret nodded. "Sometimes feelings need space," she said. "Not to distract, but to heal." The leader sighed. "You have always been obedient. Please do not place this burden on yourself now." "I understand," Sister Margaret said, and she meant it. She bowed her head and left the room. That night, sleep would not come. She lay awake listening to the soft sounds of the convent settling into darkness. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. She thought about her vows. She had promised obedience, humility, and service. Those promises had guided her entire life. But she also believed that gifts were not given by accident. She wondered if she had mistaken silence for faith all these years. Before dawn, she rose and knelt by her bed. She prayed for clarity. Not courage, not approval, but clarity. When she stood again, She felt no sudden answer, only a calm stillness. The day of the gathering arrived sooner than expected. People from the town began to arrive in the late morning. Some were old, walking slowly with canes. Others were younger, curious about the place they had heard about for years. The chapel filled with quiet voices and shared memories. Sister Margaret helped guide visitors to their seats. Many smiled at her, some recognizing her from long ago. One elderly woman held her hand tightly and whispered, "You sat with my husband when he was sick. I never forgot." Sister Margaret smiled, her eyes warm. "I'm glad I was there," she said. The service began as planned. Words were spoken, prayers offered, memories shared. Everything was proper and respectful. Yet something felt unfinished, like a sentence left without its ending. As the service continued, Sister Margaret felt the familiar stirring in her chest. The silence felt heavy again, not peaceful this time, but full of things left unsaid. Her eyes drifted toward the side door of the chapel. She knew where the key was. She knew the rule. She knew the consequences. She lowered her gaze and closed her eyes. In that moment, she thought of all the people she had served, all the pain she had witnessed, and all the times music could have helped but was never allowed. When she opened her eyes, a decision had formed quietly inside her. It was not loud or dramatic. It felt simple and true. After the final prayer, there was a pause before the next part of the program. Chairs shifted. People waited. Sister Margaret stood. The movement caught attention immediately. Murmurs spread through the room. She walked slowly, each step careful, toward the closed door. Every sound felt loud in her ears. From the front of the chapel, someone began to speak, then stopped. Sister Margaret reached the door. Her hand rested on the handle. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Then she opened it. The room beyond smelled of old wood and dust. The piano stood exactly as she remembered, its surface dull, its keys yellowed with age. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Inside the chapel, people waited in silence, unsure of what was happening. Inside the small room, Sister Margaret stood before the piano, her heart racing. She reached into her pocket and felt the smooth metal of the key she had taken from the box that morning. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the piano bench. She sat down slowly, her body stiff, her fingers hovering above the keys. For a moment, fear washed over her. She was old. Her hands were weak. What if she failed? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she pressed the first key. The sound was soft, imperfect, but real. She played another, and another. The melody came back to her not as memory, but as instinct. Years of silence fell away. Her fingers moved gently, carefully, guided by something deeper than thought. Outside the room, the chapel remained silent, waiting for what was about to unfold. The first notes drifted through the small room and slipped under the door into the chapel. They were quiet and unsure at first, like someone clearing their throat before speaking. A few people looked around, confused. Someone thought it might be a sound from outside. Then another note followed, and another, and there was no doubt anymore. The music was real. In the chapel, a hush fell over everyone. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the smallest sounds seemed to disappear, as if the room itself was listening. The melody was simple, not fast or loud. It carried a gentle sadness mixed with warmth, the kind that does not hurt but comforts. Inside the piano room, Sister Margaret sat with her back straight, her feet barely reaching the pedals. Her hands shook less now. The keys felt familiar beneath her fingers, like something she had known all her life and never truly lost. Each note brought another memory, another feeling, but she did not let them overwhelm her. She stayed with the sound. She was no longer thinking about rules or consequences. She was thinking about people. The woman who had lost her husband, the sister who cried quietly at night, the many souls she had sat beside in silence when words were not enough. She let those thoughts guide her hands. The melody grew fuller, not louder, but deeper. It filled the chapel slowly, wrapping itself around the stone walls and wooden benches. Some of the visitors lowered their heads. A few closed their eyes. One man pressed his hand against his mouth, holding back a sob. A sister near the back felt tears roll down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She did not feel embarrassed. The music seemed to give permission for feelings long held inside. At the front of the chapel, the leaders exchanged uneasy glances. This was not planned. This was not allowed. And yet, none of them stood to stop it. Something in the music held them in place. Sister Margaret's fingers moved slowly, carefully, but with confidence. She did not rush. She allowed space between the notes, letting silence speak as much as sound. Her breathing steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. The piano itself seemed to awaken. Though old and slightly out of tune, it carried the melody with surprising strength. The sound was imperfect, but honest. It did not try to impress. It only tried to reach. As the music continued, memories surfaced in the chapel. People remembered those who were no longer there. They remembered moments of kindness, loss, forgiveness, and love. The music did not tell them what to feel. It simply opened a door. Inside the piano room, Sister Margaret felt a tear slide down her face. She did not stop playing. She had waited many years for this moment, though she had never allowed herself to admit it. Now that it was here, she felt both small and full at the same time. Her hands grew tired, but she pressed on gently, adjusting the melody to match her strength. She listened closely to the sound, making sure it stayed soft and steady. This was not a performance. It was a conversation. In the chapel, a woman reached for the hand of the person beside her. They held on tightly. Someone else whispered a quiet prayer under their breath. No one asked where the music was coming from. It no longer mattered. The melody shifted slightly, moving towards something lighter. It carried hope now, not loud or joyful, but calm and reassuring, like a sunrise after a long night. Sister Margaret felt warmth spread through her chest. She remembered why she had played all those years ago. Not for praise, not for attention, but for moments like this, when hearts softened and people felt less alone. Her fingers slowed. The final notes lingered in the air, hanging gently before fading away. She lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest in her lap. For a long moment, there was no sound. No movement. Then someone sobbed quietly. Another person drew in a shaky breath. Slowly, people began to stand. Not all at once, one by one. No one clapped at first. It did not feel like the right response. Instead, they stood in silence, honoring what they had just felt. Eventually, soft applause filled the chapel. It was not loud or wild. It was slow and full of gratitude. Inside the piano room, Sister Margaret sat still, her heart pounding. She wondered if she had gone too far. She wondered if she would be asked to leave the convent she had called home for most of her life. The door opened gently. One of the convent leaders stood there. Her expression was unreadable. For a brief moment, fear tightened Sister Margaret's chest. Then the leader spoke quietly. "Please come out." Sister Margaret stood with effort, her legs unsteady. She followed her into the chapel. All eyes turned toward her. She felt exposed, small, and old, but she also felt calm. She bowed her head slightly, ready to accept whatever came next. Instead, something unexpected happened. The leader took her hand. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried great weight. Another leader stepped forward, her eyes wet. "We forgot," she said softly. "We forgot that silence and sound can serve the same purpose." Sister Margaret could not speak. Tears filled her eyes, blurring everything around her. The people in the chapel remained standing. Some smiled through tears. Others nodded quietly, as if something inside them had finally settled. Sister Margaret was guided to a seat near the front. Her hands rested in her lap, still warm from the keys. She felt exhausted, but lighter than she had in years. The gathering continued, but it was changed. Words spoken afterward carried more meaning. Prayers felt deeper. The meal that followed was quieter, warmer, filled with gentle conversation. People approached Sister Margaret throughout the afternoon. They did not praise her skill. They thanked her for the feeling the music gave them, for reminding them of loved ones, for helping them release tears they had been holding back. She listened, nodded, and smiled softly. She did not feel proud. She felt grateful. As the day came to an end and the visitors left, the convent settled back into quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It felt alive, not heavy. That evening, Sister Margaret returned to the chapel alone. She sat in her usual place, her body tired, her heart full. She looked toward the side door, no longer closed in her mind. She did not know what the future would bring. She did not know if she would be allowed to play again. But she knew one thing for certain. The gift she had once believed was meant to disappear had found its voice again. And in giving it freely, she had found a part of herself she thought was lost forever. The days after the gathering moved slowly, as if the convent itself needed time to settle. The halls returned to their quiet rhythm, but something had changed beneath the surface. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt held. Sister Margaret woke the next morning with a deep tiredness in her body and a calm in her heart. Her hands ached and her fingers felt stiff, but she smiled as she rubbed them together. The memory of the piano stayed with her, not loud or sharp, but warm and steady. At breakfast, the sisters spoke softly, as they always had, but their eyes met more often. Small smiles passed between them. Someone asked if Sister Margaret was feeling well. She nodded and thanked them. No one mentioned the music. Not yet. Later that day, one of the leaders asked her to walk with her in the garden. The path was narrow, lined with flowers that were beginning to fade with the season. They walked slowly, matching Sister Margaret's pace. "We have been talking," the leader said gently, "about what happened." Sister Margaret listened, her gaze on the ground. "We realized that our rule came from fear," the leader continued. "Fear of distraction, fear of attention. But what we saw was service." Sister Margaret stopped walking. "I did not mean to cause trouble," she said quietly. "You didn't," the leader replied. "You reminded us of something we forgot." They stood there in silence for a moment. Then the leader reached into her pocket and placed a small key into Sister Margaret's hand. "This belongs with you," she said. Sister Margaret's breath caught. She looked at the key, then back at the leader. "Only when it is helpful," she said. "Only when it is helpful." The leader agreed. From that day on, the piano room was no longer locked away in the same way. It was still respected, still quiet, but no longer forbidden. There were no announcements, no celebrations, just a simple understanding. The first time Sister Margaret returned to the piano, she went alone. She sat down carefully and rested her hands on the keys without playing. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she began, the sound was soft, almost shy. She played for only a few minutes, then stopped. That was enough. Word spread gently through the convent. Sisters began to sit in the back of the chapel during her quiet practice times. Some brought their work and listened from a distance. Others simply closed their eyes and rested. Sister Margaret never played long. Her body could not handle it. But what she played carried weight. Each note felt chosen with care. Soon, people from the town began to ask if they could come listen. The leaders agreed, but with one condition. There would be no performances, no schedules, no applause, only quiet listening. People respected that. An elderly man came one afternoon and sat in the last row, tears falling silently as the music played. A young mother came another day, holding her child close as the melody filled the room. No one spoke while the music lasted. When it ended, they left quietly, lighter than when they arrived. Sister Margaret listened to their footsteps fade and felt grateful. As weeks passed, her strength slowly declined. She moved more carefully now, and some days she could not play at all. On those days, she sat in the chapel and listened to the silence she had come to understand more deeply. One evening, the helper who had found the sheet music sat beside her. "You gave them something they didn't know they needed," she said. Sister Margaret smiled. "They gave it to themselves," she replied. The helper looked thoughtful. "What about you?" Sister Margaret considered the question. "I was reminded," she said slowly, "that what we give doesn't disappear just because time passes." As the seasons changed, the piano became part of the convent's life again. Not always present, not always heard, but welcome. Music was used during moments of loss, quiet celebration, and reflection. It never replaced silence. It walked beside it. Sister Margaret grew weaker, but her spirit felt steady. One afternoon, after playing a final soft piece, she rested her hands on the keys longer than usual. The sound faded, and she did not try to continue. She knew. That night, she slept deeply. In the days that followed, the sisters took turns sitting with her. They read to her, held her hand, and prayed quietly. The piano room door remained open. On a calm morning, with sunlight filtering through the window, Sister Margaret passed peacefully. There was no struggle. Her face was relaxed, as if she were listening to something far away. The convent gathered in the chapel later that day. The piano stood nearby, silent. After a long pause, one of the sisters sat at the bench. She was not skilled. Her hands shook. She pressed a few simple keys, slowly and gently. The sound was imperfect. It was enough. The music filled the space, carrying gratitude, loss, and love all at once. Sister Margaret's gift lived on, not in the notes themselves, but in the courage to share them. And in that quiet convent, music and silence continued to serve together, just as they were always meant to.